So the economy will not generate more gold and silver than the economy actually needs as media of exchange, leaving aside the potential industrial uses of those metals. If you look at the fiat currency system, that is debt currency generated by fractional reserve banks, whether individually or built up in cartels, such as we have in the Federal Reserve System, that is not ultimately controlled by the market because it costs nothing to generate bank credit and very, very little to generate actual bank notes. So that type of an economy would be one in which the incentives and the issuers of the currency would be to issue more and more and more because that's where they're making their profits, through loans into the economy, and they receive the principal and interest back after some time, and that's their profit. And as a result, that system has an inherent instability built into it, which of course is exacerbated, made much worse if the individuals who are running those institutions are themselves irresponsible, corrupt, potentially criminal. And even worse, if you do not have some sort of regulatory function being performed by the government to make sure that excessive issuances of those banknotes or bank deposits are not being made. And if we look at American history, we have had instances involving single banks, banks in particular regions, quasi-central banks, First and Central Bank of the United States, essentially a cartel system that was set up under the National Currency Act in the Civil War that went on until we finally had the Federal Reserve System foisted on us. And every one of those instances, every one of those systems has proven the inherent instability of the fractional reserve fiat currency mechanism. Every one of them has gone bad, in some instances catastrophically. Even the Federal Reserve System, which was touted as being scientific management of the currency and all this was going to be done on a much higher basis and control, and it was regulated, of course, because it was built into a statute that was passed in 1913. 20 years after that system was created, it collapsed in the great bank crisis of 1932. And then we got through World War II, and then we had another crisis in 1971, Nixon repudiation of the international gold standard, and we've had increasing bank instability and banking crises ever since. And instead of regulating the system or reforming the system or removing the system, really, that we have now in order to alleviate or mitigate or at least control the excesses of these kinds of crises, we've seen more and more deregulation in favor of the banks or special favors given to the banks, bailouts, as they're called, or bail-ins, as they will be called, the new ones that are coming. And that has made the system only increasingly unstable. So we're looking at a major problem coming along, and with the deregulation of financial markets, of course, they added another layer to this, which is the various derivatives, unsecured bets, as it were. Right? I don't find most of those derivatives to be any different from betting $2 on Thunderbolt in the second race in Aqueduct.
Well, this is what I would like for you to explain to our audience, because you have a solution to this particular problem, and this solution needs to be, number one, understood by the people, and number two, we need to advocate for it.
Well, I don't know that you can call it a solution because there are many aspects to the problem, but you have to build a foundation under any kind of banking or financial system, and that foundation necessarily has to be the currency unit. We're talking about a free market economy in which all goods and services are priced in terms of monetary units. If the monetary unit is itself unstable, all of those prices no longer reflect real valuations, and they may be controlled by political manipulation or economic manipulation through Wall Street or what have you. So the free market economy really cannot function in a rational manner without a sound currency unit. So we don't have a sound currency unit in this country anymore. Yes, there's gold and silver that circulates, and coins are being struck at the U.S. Mint, but in general, that coinage is not being used as actual currency in day-to-day economic commercial transactions. People trade Federal Reserve notes for U.S. gold and silver coin, and then they put the gold and silver coin in a safety deposit box or whatever. They're not using it in their actual day-to-day transactions. So the reality is, although that stuff is out there, it's not performing the proper function, or the function it should be performing. So what we need to do now, faced with a totally unstable monetary unit, Federal Reserve note, or the bank deposits that are payable in Federal Reserve notes, we have to adopt as quickly as possible an alternative sound currency unit. And that can be done at two levels in our system, having a federal system. We could adopt those units at the state level, pursuant to Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin or tender in payment of debts. So the states are constitutionally authorized to do precisely that. In fact, they're told to do that. Make gold and silver coin or tender in payment of debts. And so the states could adopt gold and silver units as currency in their own local economic markets and for the state governments. Texas has taken one step in that direction. They've created a gold and silver depository, so now people have an instrument for making those kinds of transactions through this depository. Texas needs to take a second step, which is to recognize specific gold and silver units as currency within the state of Texas, being used by the government and being used by such people as choose to use them. It can also be done at the national level. There is a statute that comes out of the Roosevelt New Deal, and it now can be found in Title 12 of the United States Code, Section 95, subsection A. And this statute gives the President and Secretary of the Treasury the authority to promulgate regulations to control the banking system. And if you read that statute, you will see that there are essentially no limits at all as to what those regulations could require.
All right. Hey, Edwin, hold that thought. I hear it in the background. The music coming on. Let us know we got another break. Hey, folks, we got more. We got about 45 minutes left with Edwin and Viera. Stay tuned.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a Left Behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear.
My guest this afternoon is Dr. Edwin Viera. Right before the break, when we were interrupted with Edwin's comments about, some legislation during the Roosevelt administration in the early 30s. Edwin, you want to pick up from there?
Right. I was talking about the ability of the president right now, or the next president who comes in, to use this statute, Title 12 of the United States Code, Section 95, subsection A, to promulgate regulations to deal with the crisis we're talking about. And as I said, that statute puts no limitation on the president's authority. Whatever regulations he puts out, the statute would approve. And that ties in with Section 30 of the original Federal Reserve Act, in which Congress retained the right to alter, amend, or appeal the act at any time. So that's what they've done in this later statute, 1933. They've given the president to make inroads on that original Federal Reserve legislation through regulations. So at the state level, I was talking earlier, people want to find out about that. I have an article called The Authority of the States to Issue Alternative Currencies, or to Adopt an Alternative Currency. They can find that on the Internet, a large PDF file on that. And newswithviews.com, if they go to my archive, they will find an article called Presidential Questions, which deals with what I'm talking about here in detail, so they can see how it all works out in very, very fine print, as it were. But basically it's this. The president could come up with regulations. He could tell the Federal Reserve banks, and not just the regional banks, but all of those member banks, the commercial banks, whether they're national banks or state banks that are part of the Federal Reserve System, here's what you people have to do. You have to set up the ability for your customers to have accounts in an alternative currency made up of gold and silver. And here's what that currency is going to be. So many grains of gold, so many grains of silver, whatever. You give the formula for that. And this is not forcing you necessarily to engage in those transactions unless the customer wants himself to have a checking account, a savings account, a CD, or whatever, using this alternative currency. So we would essentially leave it up to the individuals, to the free market. Does the average individual in his business and other transactions want to use an alternative currency? If he does, he will have the institutional ability to do this through the Federal Reserve banks. Now, I can see how the Federal Reserve banks might not like this, but it's a little difficult for them to say, well, this is inappropriate, because all it is an alternative. If those people in the paper money camp who believe and argue that nobody really wants gold and silver anymore, they're barbarous relics, they don't really work as money, then these alternative currency accounts would simply not be used. They would sit there on paper, but no people would come to those banks and say, give me an alternative currency account. If, on the other hand, it is true that gold and silver are true monies and fiat currency are really fictional currencies, then we would begin to see at least the savvy people in the market coming to the banks and say, oh, yes, I want to convert some of my Federal Reserve accounts into gold and silver accounts. And at that point, we would begin to see a free market competition between those two types of currency, fiat currency on the one hand and specie gold and silver currency on the other. And then we would see which economic theory actually is correct. I mean, the only way to test anything in the scientific method is to conduct the experiment and see what the result is, right? And that's the difficulty that we have in this country now. It's really, I won't say impossible, but it's extremely difficult for the average person in business, for instance, to engage in the use of gold and silver as an alternative currency because of the refusal of the banks to provide those kinds of accounts. So it's very difficult to make the transactions. Various tax laws that we have that discourage the use of gold and silver for those purposes, and the general ignorance of the population as to how to do it. So if you had regulations coming out under this statute and the banks were required to set up these accounts, number one, you created the institutional structure. Number two, the regulations would change a lot of those internal IRS rules, certainly, in terms of the discouragement of the use of gold and silver. And number three, you would now have publicized to the general population the fact that these alternatives were available. And now people could start to give consideration to whether, well, maybe in my financial circumstances, whatever business I have, it would be to my advantage because I have a lot of long-term contracts. I want to stabilize my returns on these contracts against the possibility of hyperinflation, for instance, which is certainly not out of possible imagination now. And how am I going to do that? Well, I want to make contracts in gold and silver to protect myself, and now I can do it because I have an institutional structure in these banks because the banks now have to comply with the regulations put out by the president. So people who say this can't be done don't know what they're talking about. It can be done by the states. There's absolutely no question they can pass these statutes. They simply haven't done it. And at the level of the government of Washington, D.C., there is a statute that grants the President and the Secretary of the Treasury the authority to do it.
Excellent idea.
So the question is, why don't we do it? And the answer is, I think it's public ignorance.
Yeah.
More than anything else.
Well, that's what we're trying to increase the level of understanding on this.
Yeah, that's right. So that's what we're talking about here. I mean, if enough people recognize this. Now, of course, in the present political climate, if we have one of the candidates that's running for president elected, we can be sure that nothing like this will ever happen. If we have the other candidate elected, it might happen.
Well, we can rule out Hillary being the one that will bring about this positive change. Do you have some inside knowledge that Donald Trump, if he's elected president, might go in this direction?
Well, I think that, number one, he's a businessman. And businessmen understand that unstable currencies are not good for business, right? And I think he probably also understands that the first major country in the world that gives its citizens the opportunity to use a truly stable free market currency is going to have a terrific advantage over other countries that retain the use of fiat currencies. Right? When we have an international crisis, which will occur because all the banks and financial markets are interconnected, all of those fiat currencies are going to go into crisis mode. Then what's the alternative? Well, the country that has the stable currency, even as an alternative currency, doesn't necessarily have to become the dominant currency, but even as an alternative currency, will now discover that investment capital will be coming into that country because that's the country in which the currency has long-term stability against political and special interest manipulation. So looking at him, if he were willing to bite the bullet, obviously the media would be against him, the banks would yell and scream, certain economists that have media presence would be calling him all sorts of names. But the beauty of what I'm suggesting is that if it's set up as an alternative, it's very difficult for people to argue against it.
Right.
Because the question is, well, why not? We're setting it up as an alternative. If it doesn't work, no one's hurt, right? If people don't use this system that's provided to them, no harm has been done. If, on the other hand, large numbers of people recognize the value of this system, then we would be providing, in essence, a foundation, an insurance policy built under the present house of cards. And that's something we don't have now. So why would any country in this facing these kinds of banking and financial crises not say, the leadership not say, oh yes, we need to have an alternative that will protect us in some way against the worst possible scenario that we can envision? How is it wrong to have insurance against that kind of a danger? So it's conceivable that someone like Trump would take that step. And he has suggested that he has some people as his advisors who are, well, let me call them gold standard people. I don't think they go all the way to the alternative currency concept, but at least they're recognizing that without having some link behind the banking system to a commodity money, and they usually talk about gold, they don't talk about silver, generally speaking, they usually talk about gold, that we're going to have increasing trouble. So there is I won't call it as much of a movement, but there's a lot of influence in certain circles of the establishment, of the people that Trump runs with, that could be whispering in his ear and say, well, we need to do something along this line. And the beauty of the alternative currency approach that I've proposed is it's really not that radical. It doesn't say, oh, we're going to get rid of the Federal Reserve System tomorrow and impose this new currency system, whatever the chaos may be that results. No. We simply give people in the free market the opportunity to opt out of one system and out of another. And you could imagine over the long term that the Federal Reserve System would simply contract, and the gold and silver economy would simply expand. Right? There would be no crisis at all. I don't think that's going to happen because the debt overhang is so great. There's going to be a crisis no matter what we do. But certainly, especially under that set of futurity, predictions, we want to move as quickly as possible to provide this alternative system at least as the backup.
Well, let's get people interested in climbing on board that proposal. Let's talk about what's going to be happening in the future. Now, we talked a little bit. I don't think we explained it in depth during the earlier part of the program. I think we were interrupted by a commercial break. But, you and I have been talking about this today about, the situation involving Deutsche Bank. Its stocks have decreased in value. It's now 10% of what it was just a couple of years ago. There's a whole bunch of banks that are in trouble. And then we have all these derivatives out there. And derivatives are playing some role in, addressing reforms of the monetary system. First, can you explain to our audience what derivatives are? And then what your proposal is to address this problem that is supposedly caused by derivatives?
Well, derivatives come in all shapes, sizes, and flavors. Futures contracts are derivatives in essence because they're contracts made upon changes in prices in various commodities. Some derivatives cover changes in interest rates. And so you'll buy what essentially amounts to an insurance policy, which says if the interest rates under some circumstances go up, then I'm going to get some compensation from the entity generally that is selling this derivative. So in a sense, they're bets on changes in economic parameters. And on the other hand, they are like insurance policies. If a certain contingency occurs, then you receive a payment. The difficulty with them is, unlike insurance, they are not regulated. They're not required to have, people at least who are selling these things, are generally not required to have, contingency funds set aside, reserves. Insurance companies are strictly regulated in every state. They have to maintain reserves based upon actuarial principles and so forth and so on. And if they don't, they find themselves in serious trouble. This derivative creation that has occurred has none of those controls, and that's why these huge amounts have been generated. So now what happens? Well, some of them offset others, so it's a wash, right? One derivative pays, and then another derivative pays on that one, and so the overall loss is zero. Gain or loss is zero. But many of them don't. And the question comes, well, what happens when these contingencies occur? When the interest rates, which are now in many places negative, suddenly go up to 2 or 3%, and these derivative bets are now called. Who's going to pay? Well, the people who have been putting them out are going to pay up to a certain extent, and then they're going to go bankrupt because they don't have enough reserves to pay. And then what happens? Well, they come screaming to Congress, asking for some kind of bailout relief, right? And we go through what happened under Paulson and Bush with the original $700 billion bailout of the banks, and it's been all downhill ever since. Except now we're talking about trillions, not billions. Right? So the debt overhang is the thing that's impossible here. I saw some numbers the other day that said that the outstanding debt in the world is now greater than the gross gross productive product of the entire world. Well, what does that tell you? Right? Now, obviously, not all those debts are going to, all those derivative debts and other debts are going to be paid at once. But you're talking about a tremendous debt burden. And the greater the debt burden becomes historically, the greater the negative weight on the productive sector. And it's production that counts. It's not these financial manipulations and financial bets and so forth, the paper transactions. It's the production of real goods and services that account for wealth. It's not, paper instruments. And there's the difficulty. Look at the United States. Very large segments of our heavy production have been shipped overseas. We don't have the productive capacity anymore that we had even before Clinton, or maybe before Bush #1, right? It's gone. How do you recover that? Well, a huge amount of effort has to be made to recover because those industries are simply gone or they rotted away. Look at Pittsburgh, Detroit, whatever. How are you going to repair all of that damage? Not to mention the fact that production in any country depends to a large extent upon the infrastructure of the country, the roads, the bridge, and so forth. And that's been allowed to go to hell in a handbasket.
All right. Well, hey, Edwin, we got music coming on. Let us know we got a break. Hey, folks, we got another 30 minutes with Dr. Edwin Viera. Stay tuned. It's interesting.
Years ahead of the dominant media, FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights media channel. You've noticed that there are few commercials on this radio network, and there's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our various affiliates. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs on our Listen and Schedule pages. Then when you subscribe, we'll send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately and continue with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We ask you to give much less than a tithe so that you may also send support directly to a particular program, host, or cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Gold and silver is tremendously undervalued. Global demand vastly exceeds mine supply by more than 60% annually. There is little in the financial world more certain than a coming explosion in the prices of gold and silver. The U.S. dollar continues to lose value and respect as the world's reserve currency. Our nation faces challenges on many fronts, and a day doesn't pass without another economist bringing forth warnings of impending economic calamity. There has never been a better time than right now to acquire physical gold and silver. Discount Gold and Silver Trading was founded on the principles of truth and honesty. We believe in providing a quality product, quality service, and most importantly, competitive pricing. We provide all forms of precious metals, including American gold, silver, platinum, and rare investment and circulated coins. Silver bars, rounds, and 90% silver bags are on hand for the silver investor. Gold self-directed IRAs are available. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, that's 1-800-375-4188. Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
And to use Randy's words, we're back. My guest this afternoon is Dr. Edwin Viera. Right before the break, we were talking about derivatives. Then we, halfway through the discussion of derivatives, we got interrupted by that last commercial message. So, Edwin, you want to pick up from there? How can we address this problem? We've got this huge debt out there. Of course, we don't owe it, and the system would probably want to, the banking system would want to pawn it off on the American taxpayer. But what do we do?
Well, as I said earlier, a lot of these derivatives have to be analyzed as bets more than anything else. And the short answer when you make a bet is it's unenforceable in court, right? You can't take your bookie to court and make him pay on that bet. So very large numbers of them could simply be treated as that. Some of them are probably illegal because they act as insurance policies, if you will, but they violate insurance principles. So on that basis, they would be unenforceable. And then, as I said earlier, a number of them would wash because one of the derivatives would be countered by another derivative, and the total gain or loss would turn out to be zero. I think we have to recognize it. The reality of these situations is any debt is always paid. Either the debtor pays, or if the debtor can't pay, the creditor ends up paying because he has to swallow the debt, or if there's some third-party guarantor, that guarantor comes in and pays. Our situation is that a lot of debts have been allowed through deregulation of the financial and banking systems. They have been expanded beyond the limits of prudence over into the area of really recklessness. And now when they fail, when the debtor fails to be able to pay and the creditors don't want to absorb the loss, the two of them are going to come looking for the guarantor, and that guarantor will be Uncle Sap, right? They're going to come to the U.S. government and say, we made these totally imprudent decisions, and we want you to make us whole. And my response to that is, well, you'll just have to eat it. And that's the only... So why are the American people going to pay for this? And the answer always is, if you don't pay, there will be financial crises. All right? The banks will fail, or some of these big financial casinos in Wall Street, and Wall Street will fail. And my response to that is, well, at some stage, we have to let you fail, because what you've proven to us is that if we bail you out at $700 billion, then you'll come back in a few years and ask for $2 trillion, and then you'll come back a few years later and ask for $10 trillion. Right? The irresponsibility will just go on and on and on, because you're like the spoiled child. You scream and yell, and mommy takes some candy out of the bowl and gives it to you, and so you never learn how to behave responsibly. So at some stage, we should have said this with the $700 billion. You should stop these things at the beginning. And now the system is, maybe 10 times worse or more, depending on how you calculate it, and it can only get worse. The more of these bailouts, bail-ins, or other forms of government support are extended to these people. There is no limit to their rapacity. There is no limit to their recklessness. They have proven that. And I don't even have to say if they're engaged in criminal activities. Probably a lot of them are, right? But this is just imprudence of the worst kind. And you cannot encourage that. You cannot reform it. You have to remove it.
Right. Well, Edwin, let me stop you right there. Just a minute ago, in my ear, I heard some clicks. That might be an indication that we have a caller coming in. And if I might, can we bring the caller on?
Yes, hi, this is John from Kersey.
We're glad to have you on this afternoon. Can you ask a quick question?
Yes, my question is this. I know that right now, Bundesbank and Deutsche Bank over in Germany are in big trouble. And I don't know if you two have talked about this yet today, but I think that for at least one of those banks, the government of Germany has said, we're not going to bail you out. That was the last I had read regarding this situation. Now, if I'm not mistaken, didn't the governments of the different countries in Europe and also Australia and the United States pass regulations saying that in the event that the government did not want to bail out a bank, then the bank was going to be able to bail in its depositors, meaning confiscate a portion of their accounts necessary to make the bank solvent?
Well, that's a possibility, but I'll let Edwin answer that.
Well, I haven't seen any general regulations to that extent. That's been the prediction and the threat there. Of course, that's what generally happens when banks go bankrupt, right?
Yeah, they did it in
your account with the bank is not your money. Your account with the bank is you're an unsecured creditor of the bank, and if the bank doesn't have the assets to pay you, then there is in fact a bail-in, and you're the last person in the line of creditors to be paid.
Yeah, right.
So that, yes, but I think what they're saying now is the banks will not go bankrupt. You will not have liquidation of the banks. They will simply confiscate to themselves some percentage of your account. Then the question arises.
That's always been the case, I think, but they just wrote it into black letter law.
I couldn't hear that.
He said it's been written into black letter law. I'm not aware of that. I don't think that there's any.
No, I'm not. I'm certainly not aware of that in the United States.
You know, they've done it in Cyprus, but hey, caller, thanks for calling in. Have you got anything else?
That would certainly encourage bank runs, don't you think?
Well, yeah, and actually, I'm positive that they've done it in at least a few countries in Europe, Italy being one of them. I'm positive they've done it in Italy. I'm also positive they've done it in Australia, because when the G20 met within the last 12 months, that is something that they specifically said was going to be required of these different governments.
Well, that's fine. Then the question becomes, what's the market's reaction to that?
Very few people very few depositors are even aware that that is the situation.
Well, they'll find out when their monthly statement comes, won't they?
Yep.
I mean,
at some stage, people are going to realize,
look what's happening. I'm keeping this money in a CD, I'm keeping this money in a checking account, savings account, whatever it is. And each month, they are deducting some significant amount of that to meet some of their own expenditures or reserve requirements or whatever it may be. How long am I going to tolerate that? And now people are going to think about alternatives. It seems to me all that does is increase the speed of that the crisis will have in the approach to the crisis, because now people will see that there's a positive danger to leaving significant amounts of money in those banks.
You know, one thing that they've done in Greece, and it still is in force, is they have restricted the amount of money you could get out of your account per day to about 70 euros, no matter what your deposit balance was. So you can't even get the money out,
or
2 years later.
That a person cannot spend money on goods, services, or whatever. I think those are cash withdrawals. Right? So I can't take the cash out. So I go and exchange my euro accounts for gold, or I go and exchange my euro accounts for stocks, or I go and exchange my euro accounts for something else, some tangible asset.
Sure. You have to do it beforehand, though, because after they lock your funds up, you can't do it.
Effect in Weimar, Germany, where the workers were coming to the...
All right, hey, guys, the music's come on. Let us know we got a break. Hey, caller, thanks for calling in. Folks, we got another segment with Edwin Viera. Stay tuned.
I pledge allegiance to the King of Kings, and to his kingdom come, on earth as it is in heaven. One holy nation, under our Heavenly Father, grace, mercy, justice for all.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights media channel. You've noticed that there are few commercials on this radio network, and there's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our various affiliates. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs on our Listen and Schedule pages. Then when you subscribe, we'll send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately and continue with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We ask you to give much less than a tithe so that you may also send support directly to a particular program, host, or cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Years ahead of the dominant media, FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
We sure can. All right, thanks so much, Dr. Edwin Viera. I really appreciate the work you're doing, and you too, Randy. I will ask some questions very quickly and then hang up so that you can answer, but I have two of them. The first one involves the issue of this SDR that I understand is going to take place October 1st, or at least they're going to add the yuan or the renminbi to the currency. The Gold Patriot guys were talking about that just before we came on. And whether that currency, the SDR, takes place and begins to balance all of these currencies, the pound, the dollar, the euro, the yen, and the yuan together now, and then begin to value or devalue whatever they decide with the IMF. That's one of the questions. And the second one revolves around Mr. Donald Trump, who, in typical Trumpian vagueness, has talked about something recently when he said the U.S. government will never run out of money because we can print all the money we need. Now, he's often vague about the things he says, and I'm just wondering, I don't want to read too much into this, but in terms of alternative currencies, guys, is Trump alluding to the fact that maybe what he means is an alternative or a constitutionally issued U.S. banknote, a lot like what Lincoln was talking about with what he did with the greenbacks? In other words, are we talking about the U.S. government, since they don't print any currency per se right now, all they print is, T-notes and bonds and things, actually printing our own U.S. dollar? Is that a possibility here? And I'm going to hang up and let you guys answer those questions. I know it's a lot there, but I'll just give you the floor so that I can listen in. So thanks so much, Randy and Dr. Viera.
Thanks for calling.
Okay, Edwin, the first question is, what do you expect to happen on October the 1st, which is something I mentioned previously?
Not much. I think they're just rearranging the IMF SDR basket to recognize the economic role of China. Actually, probably just to try to bring the Chinese more into line with the globalist establishment, right? Give them the satisfaction of being a major participant in that particular institution. As far as the other thing with Trump, I mean, he says a lot of things that are, shall I say, vague or worse. If what he's talking about is the generation of greenbacks, well, that would essentially phase out the Federal Reserve System, right? You would, if you could pay the debts of the U.S. government through the issuance of paper money directly out of the Treasury, you would never have to borrow again. And, of course, you could pay off all of the debts that are now outstanding with this new currency. The difficulty with that is, if you look at the greenback era, Congress specified the amounts of greenbacks that were to be emitted by the Treasury.
$300 billion.
It was not discretionary with the President and Secretary of Treasury. There were fixed limits coming out of Congress. So there's one constraint on this. Of course, the other constraint is if they start generating paper currency, what happened to the value of that currency during the Civil War? I mean, actually after the Civil War, it was going on for a while. It depreciated. Right? The markets looked at that and said, well, there's no limit to this. And so we can anticipate inflationary events and potentially hyperinflationary events. And eventually, 1875, Congress was required by reality to go back to a redemption system for the greenbacks. So I don't know how Trump would think about stabilizing that kind of a system unless there were some quote-unquote backing, and the backing would have to be real, not simply in a vault somewhere. It would have to be such that it could be paid out to people who brought those greenbacks back to the Treasury, a la the 1975 Redemption Act. So I'm not sure that he's even thought about that. I mean, it's kind of vague idea. What are the consequences of generating new paper money into the market system every year to pay? What was the national budget this year? How much was it?
We got $19 trillion in debt, and we got $3 trillion as a budget.
Yeah, so we're going to put in $3 trillion. Just $3 trillion. We're going to put $3 trillion more.
40% of that is borrowed. 40% of it is borrowed. It's being financed by the Fed. They're selling 40% of the federal budget is being floated by the Fed.
Yeah, and it's based on the issuance of debt. I think what Trump is saying, well, we don't need to issue this debt. We don't need to continue to expand the debt. No, you don't need to continue to expand the debt. But what happens to the value of the currency unit? As each year you put out a new $3 trillion more, $5 trillion more. Right? The whole theory of paper money management is that you can continue to put out more paper money, and that will generate more production, and so the production balances off against the paper money, and therefore you don't have significant inflationary effects. That's the theory. Okay. What happens if that doesn't happen? If you're in an economy that is not increasing its level of production with the rate of expansion of the monetary unit, you have inflation, right? Massive inflation, because we're talking about huge numbers here. I don't think he thought this through. I think this is something that came off the top of his head.
Well, thanks for calling in, caller. Hey, Edwin, we only got a few minutes left in the program. I want your comments about the Second Amendment. We got Hillary promising to, ramp up the gun laws. Give us a quick summary of your position regarding the Second Amendment and the ability of the federal government to do that.
Well, the ability of the federal government to do what she wants to do is null. It has no such ability. The Second Amendment talks about a well-regulated militia being necessary to security of a free state. That's the key factor there, right? That's why ultimately, the right of the people to keep and bear arms is there at all. And in order for the people to be able to serve in these institutions, and of course, the original Constitution talks about Congress organizing, arming, and training, and so forth, the militia of the several states. So the bottom line on this is, the only thing that Congress and the states can do with respect to gun regulation is to provide firearms and training, or to allow people to purchase their own firearms, essentially in the free market, so that they can perform this ultimate governmental function. What Hillary wants to do is destroy the ability of the people of this country to perform the very functions the Constitution says is necessary to the security of a free state, as well as to make it essentially impossible for them, or very, very difficult for them, to engage in individual self-defense. I mean, this is one of the most subversive argument or positions that could possibly be presented by any politician. She wants to make it impossible for this country to continue to have a free state as the Constitution describes it and requires.
All right. Hey, Edwin, I think we got a short break, and then we'll come back for a few minutes, and I want you to pick up there with some final comments about the Second Amendment. Stay tuned, folks.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
The Greatest Prophecy DVD from Cross the Border Productions. Embrace the little-known but greatest prophecy given by the great high priest, the Messiah, reveals the Creator's once secret plan for mankind at the first sacrificial event. Believe it. Behold the end times in Daniel chapter 2, because
the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure.
It is the key to prophecy future. Comprehend the 7-year great tribulation deception. Be not deceived. Understand the great prophecy delusion, because
if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect.
Be forewarned. America, in prophecy, exposed for all to see. You must see it. The mark of the beast. No, it's not a biochip. A much better and more secure technology is already here, and you are already using it. We will bonus you with a free copy of Richard Bennett's groundbreaking work, The Inquisition, when you send a support donation of $20 to First Amendment Radio. Visit the shopping page at our website or send $20 cash to First Amendment Radio, 139 East Tulare, Tulare Avenue, Tulare, California, 93274. Send your support donation of $20 cash to First Amendment Radio, 139 East Tulare, Tulare, Tulare Avenue, Tulare, California, 93274, or $30 U.S. for international priority mail outside the USA. A wise man is forewarned and prepares for the times to come. Will you be ready? The Greatest Prophecy DVD. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
Individual right to keep and bear arms is fine, and that would be obviously protected under the constitutional system as I'm describing it. But the individual right to keep and bear arms is not going to be effective to maintain a free state against the threat of internal enemies, the tyrant, right? The usurper, and so forth and so on. That can be maintained only, as the Constitution says, by a well-regulated militia, which is necessary for that purpose. And what we have today is people focusing on this concept of the individual right, both for it and against it, and no one looking in back of that and saying, well, wait a minute, why is that even there? Besides the obvious fact that people have a natural right to defend themselves against attack by aggressors, criminals, so forth and so on. Why is that even there? Why would they have put that into the Constitution? And the answer is because the Founding Fathers wanted to maintain in the hands of the people the ability to function in these institutions called militia, which were the ultimate protectors and guarantors of a free state. That's it. And anyone that doesn't see that is really reading only a very small percentage of the Second Amendment.
Is this discussed in your book in detail, Sword and Sovereignty?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It goes back into the history into the colonial period and shows precisely where all of these concepts that are put into the Constitution derived.
And where can people get a copy of Sword and Sovereignty?
Well, they can get all my books on the militia, Sword and Sovereignty, Constitutional Homeland Security, 13 Words, the 3 Rights. All of that can be found on Amazon.com.
And you write for News with Views. Do they have an archive of all your articles?
Yes, you go to News with Views homepage, go to the list of contributors on the left-hand side, scan down, find my name, click on that, and you'll find an archive which has a number of articles dealing with the militia, the Second Amendment, and so forth and so on, that whole area.
And what do you think is going to happen with the election?
Well, I'm getting a feeling that Trump has a very good chance to win.
That's good news.
I'm not going to tell you. I want to take a political position. I try to step back from that. But considering the
alternative,
considering the debate, right? You look at that debate that he just had on Monday night, and even outlets such as Variety magazine, which is the Hollywood publication, right? Where all the Hollywood people, the Michael people out there. Even the poll taken by Variety magazine had him ahead. There was apparently a real groundswell, I think, of disgust with the establishment and probably disgust with the particular candidate that the Democratic Party has put forward. And she can't escape all of these crises that are still brewing about the emails and the rest of it and the Clinton Foundation and her health, right? All of that is percolating. And here's Trump, who is the anti-establishment figure.
Hey, you mentioned Rudy Giuliani's statement that you made. Tell me what you said to me right before the start of the program regarding him.
Well, I thought that was an amazing statement. Giuliani at one point said he characterized the Clinton Foundation as a racketeering enterprise. And I thought that was an amazing statement because, number one, he was a prosecutor who prosecuted mob figures in New York. And so he certainly understands what the RICO Act is all about, racketeering enterprise is all about. And that would be defamation per se in general if he didn't believe it was true or didn't have a sound argument.
All right. Well, hey, Edwin, I'm going to have to interrupt you here. The music caller let us know the end of the program's arrived. I want to thank you for being my guest this afternoon. As always, you're great.
Thank you, Larry. Anytime.
My pleasure.
Gold and silver is tremendously undervalued. Global demand vastly exceeds mine supply by more than 60% annually. There is little in the financial world more certain than a coming explosion in the prices of gold and silver. The U.S. dollar continues to lose value and respect as the world's reserve currency. Our nation faces challenges on many fronts, and a day doesn't pass without another economist bringing forth warnings of impending economic calamity. There has never been a better time than right now to acquire physical gold and silver. Discount Gold and Silver Trading was founded on the principles of truth and honesty. We believe in providing a quality product, quality service, and most importantly, competitive pricing. We provide all forms of precious metals, including American gold, silver, platinum, and rare investment and circulated coins. Silver bars, rounds, and 90% silver bags are on hand for the silver investor. Gold self-directed IRAs are available. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, that's 1-800-375-4188.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately. and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.